The Sierra Nevada mountains are a graveyard of ambition. To the men of the Southern Pacific Railroad in the early 20th century, this was not just a scenic vista, it was the hill, a relentless, oxygen-starved climb through granite and ice. Between Roseville and Sparks, the rail line did not just crawl over the peaks, it burrowed through them. Over 40 miles of tunnels and timber-built snowsheds were constructed to keep the tracks clear of 30-foot drifts, but in doing so, the railroad created a series of death traps. Inside these dark, airless galleries, the greatest mechanical marvels of the age, the massive steam locomotives, became silent executioners. The crisis reached a breaking point between 1910 and 1920. Imagine standing on the footplate of a conventional steam engine, a 200-ton beast of iron and fire, as it enters a 2-mile tunnel. The stack is belching a volcanic plume of soot and sulfurous coal gas. Because the locomotive is moving uphill at a crawl, it cannot outrun its own exhaust. The smoke hits the ceiling of the tunnel, curls back down, and is sucked directly into the open cab. Within seconds, the temperature skyrockets to 130 degrees. The oxygen is consumed by the firebox, replaced by a lethal concentration of carbon monoxide. Crews were found slumped over their controls, their lungs seared and their eyes rolled back, while the train continued to ghost through the mountain, a pilotless ship of steel. In those 10 years, an estimated 15 to 20 crewmen were lost every single year to asphyxiation. The widows of the Southern Pacific began to petition the railroad, not for higher wages, but for the basic right of their husbands to return home with breath in their lungs. The industry consensus was that this was simply the cost of doing business on the hill. Engineering dogma stated that a locomotive had to be built one way, with the boiler in front, the firebox in the middle, and the crew at the rear. To suggest anything else was seen as a violation of the laws of physics and common sense. Then came a proposal that sounded like madness. An engineer, looking at the mounting death toll and the failure of tunnel ventilation systems, suggested a radical departure from a century of tradition. If the smoke was killing the crew, why not put the crew in front of the smoke? The idea was to flip the entire locomotive, to build a cab forward design where the crew sat at the very tip of the engine, with the boiler and the smokestack trailing behind them. The mockery from the engineering community was immediate and vitriolic. Critics claimed the radiant heat would roast the crew alive, that the balance would cause derailments on mountain curves, and trade journals called it engineering in reverse, a monstrosity that would cause more deaths than it saved. But the Southern Pacific, facing a revolt from its labor unions and a literal mountain of corpses, had no choice but to gamble. They turned to the Baldwin Locomotive Works to manifest this backward heresy. The result was the MC-1, a massive, articulated behemoth that looked like nothing else on Earth. It was a 4882 Mallet, a machine of raw, violent tractive effort that stretched over 120 feet long. By placing the cab at the front, the air intake for the crew was now positioned in clean air, yards ahead of the suffocating exhaust. When the first cab-forward locomotives entered service, the transformation was instantaneous and miraculous. Crew testimonies from 1910 describe a surreal experience. Instead of the usual frantic struggle to breathe through wet rags while blinded by soot, engineers found themselves sitting in a cool, quiet cabin with a panoramic view of the tracks ahead. The temperature dropped from a sweltering 140 degrees to a manageable 85 degrees. In 1928, a series of safety tests conducted in the heart of the Sierra tunnels revealed a staggering disparity. In a conventional locomotive, carbon monoxide concentrations were measured at over 5,000 parts per million, a lethal dose within minutes. In the cab of the new AC series backwards engines, the concentration was near zero. The insane design had effectively solved a problem that decades of ventilation engineering had failed to touch. As more of these machines, eventually totaling 256 units, were rolled out, the death rate from asphyxiation on the Southern Pacific's mountain divisions did not just drop, it plummeted. Within 2 years of widespread adoption of the cab-forward design, Crew fatalities from smoke inhalation fell to nearly zero. The railroad, once a place of dread, became a showcase of industrial safety. Insurance companies that had previously charged exorbitant premiums for mountain crews began to slash their rates. The design was saving an estimated 200 lives per year, not just from direct asphyxiation, but from the myriad of collisions and derailments caused by incapacitated crews. The engineering of these giants was a masterclass in adaptation. Because they were oil-fired, the Southern Pacific did not need a fireman to shovel coal into a forward-facing firebox, a feat that would have been impossible. Instead, oil was piped under pressure from the tender at the rear, through the length of the engine, to the burners. The articulation, the Mallet system, allowed this million-pound titan to bend in the middle like a serpent, snaking through the 10-degree curves of the Sierras with a grace that silenced the critics who had predicted a lack of balance. The tractive effort was equally legendary. The AC-12, the pinnacle of the design, possessed 124,300 pounds of starting tractive force. It could haul 4,000-ton fruit expresses, the Pacific Fruit Express, at speeds that traditional engines could not dream of on those grades. It was not just a safety feature, it was the most efficient mountain climber in the world. The skeptics who had mocked the design were forced to watch as the cab forward became the backbone of the most profitable railroad line in America. It was the underdog behemoth that had been laughed out of the room, now carrying the weight of the nation on its back. During World War II, the cab forwards became even more critical. They were the engines that moved the troops and the tanks to the Pacific Theater. They worked 24 hours a day, clawing their way through the snow and the smoke, proving their reliability. They were so durable that some of them clocked over 1.5 million miles in the harshest conditions imaginable. They often went 1,200 miles between major maintenance stops, a figure that put standard designs to shame. Yet, despite their overwhelming success, the cab forward remained a regional anomaly. The design dogma of the East Coast railroads and the eventual rise of the diesel-electric locomotive ensured that the cab forward would never become a global standard. Diesel engines, by their nature, allowed for a front-facing cab without the smoke issues of steam, rendering the specific backward steam design obsolete by the 1950s. The story of the cab forward is more than industrial history. It is proof that the cost of doing business does not have to be measured in human lives. In the freezing dark of the Sierra tunnels, a backward engine taught the world that the right way to build a machine is whatever way brings the men home alive. The lesson is clear. When told a problem is impossible to solve without breaking tradition, remember the Southern Pacific cab forward. Remember the engineers who laughed and the 200 men per year who lived because one person dared to build something different. The legacy lives on in every modern crane, high-speed train, and mining machine with a forward-mounted cab, descendants of the Southern Pacific's backward gamble. They were pioneers of human-centered design, long before it had a name. So here's to the machines that were too weird to live, but too good to die. The Southern Pacific cab forward remains king of the hill, a titan that proved the critics are only right until the wheels start to turn.